Good afternoon. My name is Nicholas Phillips, and I will be serving as your host and moderator today. Today is all about business writing and writing in the workplace. Joining me is Craig Snow, who's a senior lecturer at the S.C. Johnson College of Business. Craig also happens to be the faculty author of our business writing certificate program. And for you music fans out there, he'll tell you why he has a Pat Benatar record behind him. I promise we will get to that. Craig, it is so good to have you. It's been a little while.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased to be with you and the folks who are joining us.
I'm so excited. It's been about 2 years. So, audience, just very, very quickly, we will be fielding your questions. So, please submit those in the viewer chat there. And I promise we will get to as many as we can. We also have a couple questions for you as well. So, scan the QR code with your phone. We'll put that up on the screen shortly. And you can also go to the link in the viewer chat as well. And you can submit your responses, and we'll try to see that as they come up. So, before we kind of delve into our conversation today, me and Craig actually have a question for you. So again, you can scan the QR code with your phone or go to the link in the viewer chat. We want to know when it comes to, writing, be it a memo, an email, something you've written in the workplace, what's a pain point for you? Or, what's something that you struggled with recently, or just something you struggle with in general? And, kind of as we're waiting for the responses, Craig, I know one of my pain points for sure is that I'm very long-winded. So when I, write an email, for example, I tend to overcompensate and make my email super short. And I feel like nobody can really understand me when I'm sending off an email. It's definitely a big pain point for me.
So, what you're describing, at least in part, addresses two ostensibly conflicting goals
Okay.
where people believe they have to make a choice. And it's an important set of considerations. On the one hand, people want to keep their documents brief, which is a legitimate goal.
Mhm.
And on the other hand, writers and readers want documents to be complete.
Mhm.
And these goals seem to pull us in two different directions. Because if you're going to prioritize being brief, there's a likelihood that you're going to sacrifice completeness. And if you're going to be complete in a document, there's a likelihood you're going to sacrifice brevity.
Mhm.
And so many people will say, well, I'm going to choose one or the other in every communication situation, which is one way to play. There's another way to play, which is to say you can design documents that reconcile both at the same time. It's possible to create a single document that meets the needs of minimalist audiences who want brevity, and at the same document meets the needs of maximalist audiences who want the detail. And that starts with a number of things, but the two most important things: to make clear upfront your purpose for writing
Okay.
and whatever main point or point you're trying to convey, which is to say, get to the point quickly. Readers want to know playfully, what's the big idea? The longer they have to wait to get to that, the greater pain we are causing them. And so if you surface purposes and points up front, somewhere within the opening, then the rest of the document is your opportunity to unpack those points
Mhm.
or specific detail, evidence, exaggeration, evidence elaboration, etc. So those who don't need the evidence can hope and will expect to find the most important information up front.
Mhm.
But those who see the most important information, purposes and points, and want to know what's the basis, how did you get there, they will read the detail. So one document, well designed, can meet the needs of both types of readers.
That's very good to know. And we're slowly starting to get some viewer responses. And so really the big one that jumps out to me is being concise, one, and clarity is another one. So those are really kind of the two big responses that we're getting as far as pain points go for the audience. And then not surprisingly enough, tone is also another big one there. And I think we're going to talk about all three of those as we kind of continue our conversation. And audience, thank you for your responses there. So I want to kind of get a little bit of background as we're talking a little bit about, business writing and writing in the workplace. So how does that type of writing differ from, say, creative writing or, academic writing, writing a paper or something?
So there are three main modes when it comes to writing. We're going to characterize workplace writing, which is distinct from the sort of writing and reading that we do in our leisure hours. And that's different from academic writing. So let me just start with, we'll start with workplace writing. Workplace writing is different than the others in who we write for, why we write, and the way in which people read. The fundamental assumption for workplace writing is that we write and workplace audiences read in order to gather information or convey information to influence decisions. That is, it's practical or pragmatic. We're sharing information or gathering information because audiences need information or want information to make some sort of decision in the immediate, medium, or long term. Decisions about scheduling, decisions about resource allocation, decisions about hiring, supervising, firing, decisions about all sorts of workplace related opportunities. That's what workplace writing is about. It's what drives us as workplace writers, figure out what decision, if any, we're trying to influence. It's what drives us as workplace readers. In fact, I'll use this as an opportunity. The fundamental guideline that explains workplace readers. This will have implications also with regard to length and conciseness. Here's a fundamental premise. I encourage all participants today to test this against their own experience when they read in the workplace or when they write in the workplace. Workplace readers want to be able to find the most important information quickly. I'm going to say it again because it's so important. Workplace readers, in almost every workplace reading situation, they want to be able to find the most important information quickly. Now, many people hear that, and even if they agree, they think that means keep every message as brief as possible. And as my answer to your first question suggests, that's not the real remedy, because sometimes we're so brief that we leave out important information. And I would suggest that brevity, what people call conciseness, is not the highest level virtue, because some documents need to be longer for good reasons. A much higher level virtue is clarity. And again, you've mentioned this. You said that the audience has identified that as well. Clarity with regard to workplace writing is the highest level virtue. Many of my former students used to tease me. Snowman says clarity is the highest level virtue. It's like, it's the highest level virtue with regard to workplace writing. It's not the highest level behavioral virtues.
Yeah.
Honesty and others are higher level behavioral virtues. But for workplace writing, clarity. Now, what does clarity mean? It means readers want to be able to learn, once again, fundamental concerns. What's your purpose? What do you want? Why are you writing? What are you trying to accomplish? Once they know your purpose, they want to know what main point or points are you trying to convey. And I encourage your audience members as they test this against their experience. Consider what their reaction is when they go to their email, Outlook or other, Gmail, but items come into their inbox. As they consider opening an email message, what question goes through their mind? Again, most experienced workplace readers, the first question is not, do you love me? Do you care whether your writer cares about you? Aside, stop opening emails with, I hope this message finds you well. That's not the first question. The first question is usually, what do you want? It's not what's your name. Stop opening with your name. Opening with your name and opening with, I hope this message finds you well. Those are wasted words. They're empty calorie sentences. Instead, find an appropriate, sometimes polite way to state your purpose. That could be as simple as the purpose of this document is to fill in the blanks. Although that's very stilted phrasing, very formal. But it's much more common, and I would encourage, give yourself permission to say something like, I am writing in order to. I am writing to fill in the blanks. And if your purpose for writing is to convey a request, as the folks at Hewlett Packard say, lead with the ask. Lead with the polite request. Might you be willing to? Are you available to meet with me on? Can we reschedule tomorrow's meeting for sometime on Thursday afternoon? If you politely lead with the ask, That provides the reader with the opportunity to hit reply and say yes, no, etc. And if you think there might be some resistance after you lead with the ask, you can provide the explanation. Here's why I'm presenting this request. So
I'm
workplace readers want the most important information quickly and easily. How does that compare with at leisure for pleasure? At leisure for pleasure, whether we read essays or novels, Harry Potter, The Great Gatsby from F. Scott Fitzgerald, or Alice in Wonderland, or even Oedipus Rex, Oedipus Tyrannus. We read these things for fun, for entertainment, not to make decisions. We don't make decisions based on Alice in Wonderland. We don't read Oedipus Rex to determine whether we should slay our father and marry our mother. It's different type of writing and reading for different purposes. And the last of these, then, the academic writing, essays that are common in freshman writing courses, for example, or even term papers that often are assigned. Instructors assign these for different purposes than to influence decision making. That is, they don't assign writing to make decisions about whatever conclusions or recommendations someone presents. The only decision instructors tend to make, typically based on student writing, is what grade to assign.
Okay.
What grade do you get? Mm-hmm. Instructors tend to read assignments from first word to last. It would be irresponsible not to do so. In the workplace, that's not how people work. People don't always read documents from first word to last. They sometimes scan. They sometimes skim. They sometimes read in full. They sometimes reread in full or in part. So the way in which people read in the workplace is different than people read in other contexts. We wouldn't start Harry Potter in chapter 2 or chapter 10. We read Harry Potter from beginning to end. Workplace documents are different. Academic documents tend to be different.
I definitely have to say I'm one of those who I feel like I always start every email with like, oh, I hope you're doing well. I hope this email message finds you well. I'm notorious for that now that I'm thinking about it.
Let me add just a little bit there. My students hear me say that and they say, oh, Professor Snow hates it. The underlying goal why people tend to do that is they feel that it may be too abrupt or sometimes rude to begin with their purpose for writing. And especially if they're writing to someone they've never met before, they're writing someone higher in the food chain and organization, they don't want to be perceived as being disrespectful or rude. That's a legitimate concern. What they're engaging in when they say, I hope this message finds you well, those, I hope this message finds 7 words, they're trying to engage in relationship management or provide general courtesy. They're trying to be polite. Mm-hmm. The question that I pose is, do you believe that those 7 words really convey that you're a polite person? In fact, I'll offer some evidence here. If anyone were to go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to write an email for him or her, in most cases, ChatGPT will open the email with, I hope this message finds you well, which means a mindless app will open with, I hope this message finds you well. And the reason ChatGPT will do that in most cases is that when ChatGPT looks in its own archives, its own database, how to write an effective email, and its archives are email messages over the years, so many people open with that mindless sentence that ChatGPT thinks that's the way you should open it. But again, I'm using this term deliberately. That's mindless writing as opposed to mindful writing. I'm not saying that you would never open with general courtesies or relationship management, but if you're going to do so, say something meaningful. Say something that really demonstrates you've thought about your relationship with your audience and that it's specific to that relationship. So, for example, a former student who hasn't been in touch with me for a few years might write to me for whatever reason, and instead of opening with, I hope this message finds you well, which none of my former students will do, a student might open with, because they've learned that it's not the best way to play, unless they do so playfully. They will do that playfully. What they will say is, although I feel sorry, it's been so many years since we've been in touch, I thought of you because. So at least there's some acknowledgement, but it requires thinking. Mm-hmm. That is, you have to burn some brain cells to come up with something meaningful, as opposed to burn no brain cells with, I hope this message finds you well.
Yeah.
So critic thinking, disciplined thinking is what it's about. But unless add one final comment here, not every document, email or otherwise, requires general courtesies.
True.
Does it? It's not required. Sometimes just get to it. Lead with the ask. Surface your purpose. The question is, should opening with a general courtesy be the norm and omitting the general courtesy be the exception, which is what most novices think, as opposed to what more experienced folks know, which is omitting it is the norm, but on occasion, including the general courtesy would be the exception.
That's very good to know. And with that, we actually just got a really interesting question in from Guy Q. So, we're talking about, niceties and things like that and kind of trying to eliminate them, kind of at the onset. Guy wanted to know, can you really read tone, or is tone more about the receiver and biases that they have? So when we're talking about writing, of course.
So let me just quickly define tone. Tone is a difficult concept to define and sometimes difficult to identify. But when we refer to tone in writing, we refer to the writer's implicit or explicit attitude. Okay. It's a function of attitude towards the reader, towards the subject, or both. Okay. The attitude that's conveyed. And the truth is, in workplace writing, in most cases, workplace writing has a neutral tone. Most cases, the tone is neutral. There are exceptions where we want to be especially formal. If we're writing high up in an organization to someone we've never written to before, you're writing to the CEO. Or there may be occasions where we want to be especially friendly or informal, depending upon the nature of our relationship with the readers. So people can detect tone, I believe. But again, in most cases, a neutral tone is perfectly fine. We don't want to come across as being overbearing or too deferential, but there are occasions where we deviate from that norm.
And Mouse checks in with a question. We were talking a little bit about, that greeting to kind of take out of your first email. I hope this message finds you well. They just wanted to know, should we add in that later on in the email or, in a follow-up email or something?
Good. So that's a good question. So when it comes to relationship management, there are two places within a document, email, for example, where if we use it, it's most common. And folks can probably even identify before I even say it. Openings, closings. And so sometimes, instead of opening with something that's mindless, that they're just going to skip over and assign no weight to, maybe you build something relationship management related into the closing. That's a suitable thing to do as part of the closing, general courtesies. But I do want to add one more thing as I'm reminded of this. Norms will vary across cultures. And so the guidelines I'm suggesting I'm trying to generalize about workplace writing, especially Western norms, which have derived mostly from American norms. But there are certain cultures where relationship management is especially important. And this is true, for example, of Asian cultures, folks in Japan, Korea, China, Vietnam. And one of my students this semester pointed out in France, too, it would be very unusual to open a document omitting, for example, some sort of general courtesy.
Okay.
So again, different cultures will vary. Respect the cultural norms that you're in or that your audience is in. Respect those. But again, barring that situation, it's okay to be direct. So when I correspond with a client from Japan, I'm more likely to build in some general courtesies than I would to cover the same topic with a client of mine in Toronto, even though I expect Canadians to be especially more friendly than Americans. I'm probably going to be more direct with a Toronto-based client or probably an American client as opposed to a client back in Japan.
That's good to know. And kind of along this line of being, obviously direct and lead with the ask, Barbara just commented real quick. She said, I'm told that I'm too direct in memos and emails. Any suggestions?
Yes, so it's a good idea. And again, when when people are uncomfortable leading with an ask,
Okay.
which makes many of them tempted not to lead with it, to bury it.
Mhm.
There's a risk of burying with the ask, and there's a remedy. The risk of burying an ask, if your fundamental purpose is to convey a request, don't bury it, because the risk of burying is they may not find it. The harder they have to work to find the important information, the greater the risk is that they won't do it, or they'll get it wrong, or they'll get it right, but they will be annoyed with you. You harm your credibility. So rather than bury it, what I would normally suggest is surface it, but manage your tone. Convey it in a very polite way. So again, almost any time I make a request, except with really close friends, the phrasing is something like, might you be willing to? Could we? So there's a softening of the phrasing. Would you be available? Even if I have a student, for example, where there's some degree of power imbalance. If a student is scheduled to meet with me tomorrow morning for a tutorial session, which it is, which one student is, if I need to reschedule that, I would probably send that student an email and say, might you be available, or might you be able to reschedule the meeting with me that we had planned for tomorrow morning at 7? Lead right there. Single sentence, end of paragraph. And then I'd probably have a new paragraph. I can't make it tomorrow morning at 7 because A, B, C, and D. And then I'd probably add, but I am available tomorrow afternoon, starting at this time, Wednesday, starting at this time, et cetera, et cetera. But it's leading with the ask in a polite way. Might you be able to reschedule? It's softer than I need to reschedule or we must reschedule. So again, we can convey the politeness via the phrasing, via the tone, but still stay direct, the request up front.
And, kind of with all this in mind, one thing that you mentioned probably a couple minutes into our keynote was clarity. So, why is clarity so important, especially when we're talking about writing in the workplace and business writing in general?
Good question. So, especially as documents get longer, there's a tremendous risk for information overload. The more information you convey within a document, the longer a document extends, the more topics and the more points you convey, the harder the readers have to work. And again, as we've suggested earlier, going back to the foundation principle, workplace readers want to be able to find the most important information quickly and easily. The harder they have to work to figure out, number one, what your purpose is. What do you want? Are you writing to inform me about something, to try and influence a conclusion or something I believe or will do, or convey a request? The harder the harder I have to work and the longer I have to wait as a reader to find out that information, the unhappier the reader will be. The unhappier. So if we start with the assumption workplace readers want to be able to find the most important information quickly and easily, that translates really into three things that they want. No matter how long a document is, what they want value. They want to make sure that everything within the document is of use to them so that they will be better off by the time they're done reading. They have all the information they need that they've asked for or that you want to convey to them. So value is the first part. The second part is they want speed. They want to be able to find the most important information swiftly. That doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be brief. It can be as long as it needs to be. But we want to manage the visual display, what we call document design, to enable them to navigate easily. And we'll talk more about visual design in a moment. And beyond value and speed, ease they value. That is to say, they want not to have to work too hard. They don't want to have to work too hard to figure out the most important information. Once again, the most important information, what's your purpose? And once we know your purpose, what main points are you trying to convey? So that's what workplace readers want. And if you like, I can now provide a brief summary, an executive summary of what top performing workplace writers do in order to satisfy those desires of workplace readers.
Yeah, I was just
Jump ahead.
yeah, I was just about to actually ask you that. I know we had talked kind of before our keynote started about Amazon's 6-page memo. You had mentioned P&G's 1-page memo as well. So I'm wondering, can you go a little bit into those two different document styles and give us a little background about them?
Sure. So when it comes to workplace writing, there are sort of two main modes at the extremes for workplace documents, whether these are Word documents or white papers. And to some degree, these apply to email messages as well. But for Word documents, memo reports, for example, the two main modes are the Amazon mode and the Procter & Gamble mode. At Amazon, there's a norm at Amazon, particularly within product management decisions, product management documents, what at Amazon they refer to as the 6-pager. So at Amazon, which is one of my clients, and many of our students from Cornell go to work at Amazon. There's probably some Amazon employees on this call. At Amazon, Jeff Bezos, 20 years ago or more, decided that they were not going to be using PowerPoint to drive decisions, but instead they were going to use memo reports to drive decisions. And what he found, that in order for someone in product management to make a recommendation about a change or a creation of a product, it takes roughly 6 pages of thoughtful discussion to make clear what they think is appropriate, why, and how. And so the norm, or the term became the 6-pager at Amazon. The premise being that's what it takes to fully think it through. And Jeff Bezos explained, or he found, and many Amazon employees find, it could take a good week or two to write a really good 6-pager, especially clear, especially persuasive, managing the tone, all of the other elements. And the way it typically works at Amazon, which is a very writing intensive culture, when they call a meeting, for example, a product management meeting to consider some sort of change or some initiative, the document, the 6-pager, is sometimes sent ahead as a pre-read, but more often hard copies are brought to the meeting and distributed at the meeting. So a 1-hour meeting may be scheduled for all the principals involved in making the decision. At the beginning of the meeting, hard copy of the 6-pager is distributed, and the first 20 minutes of the meeting is devoted to silent reading. And this is done, as I understand it, because not everyone who has a vested interest who comes may have completed the pre-read. Despite our best efforts, we don't always do what we know we should. So they said, first 20 minutes, everyone together silently reads, and the next 40 minutes of the meeting is discussion. And at the end, that drives a decision as appropriate. Go, no go, or some modification. So the Amazon is the notorious 6-pager. It's not unusual to get students who come to me, I'm thinking about enrolling in your course. I have a summer internship at Amazon. Will I learn how to write a 6-pager? You're in the right place. But at the other extreme, we have Procter & Gamble, consumer products, one of the world's finest out of Cincinnati. And at Procter & Gamble, the writing norm is what they call the 1-pager. The premise being at Procter & Gamble, the guideline is no document should be longer than a single page. So this is very different than Amazon. We're pulling in two different directions. And I can recall the first time I learned about this, which was back in 2012 from a student of mine named Bill DeGroot, who before he became an MBA student had worked at Procter & Gamble. So he said, no, we have the 1-pager. I said, well, I don't understand. What if you have more than 1 page worth of information to convey? What do? Do you make it really, really small font, like 3-point font? Do you simply reduce your margins so you have no margins, top, bottom, and side? Does 1 page allow 2 sides? How does that work? And Bill's response was, no, you use attachments, use appendices. And there's a brilliance to it. And as I've learned more, what I found, 2 things. Number one, 1 page is a guideline, although it's not absolute. If a document bleeds onto a 2nd page, that's acceptable. Right? It's not as if people absolutely stop because they're afraid to get a paper cut turning the page. So 1 page is the preference, but it's okay to bleed over. But detailed discussion, which, for example, at Amazon might come in the middle of the document, at Procter & Gamble, they say, no, we make that appendices. And the brilliance of this approach at Procter & Gamble is it forces upon the writer to prioritize. It says to the writer, do your readers a favor, think it through and figure out what's essential for them to know and try and get that into one page. And what's important, but perhaps less essential, consider putting that as appendices. So once again, this goes back to your first question. All readers will always read the main memo because they know that's going to have the essential information.
Mhm.
Some readers will read or scan or skim the appendices if they need the more detailed explanation. There's a brilliance to it.
It really is. And with those two examples, I'd just be curious to know, is there like a certain structure that these documents have, or are there certain things that are omitted? So I'm thinking like, graphics or bullet points or something. Like, do these documents have a certain structure?
So I'm going to use this as a transition, if it's okay for you, to summarize, given that workplace readers want to be able to find the most information quickly and easily. I'm
Mhm.
going to summarize what the top performing writers do. And I'm
Okay.
going to suggest to you that the top performing writers engage in four main activities.
Okay.
And it's all about disciplined thinking. This is what effective workplace writing is. It's about thinking. Any good course influences how people think
Mhm.
because you cannot be a good writer unless you're a disciplined thinker. You can be a good thinker without being a good writer, but you can't be a good writer without being a good thinker because it's all about disciplined thinking. So, what are the four most important things that top quality writers do? The first of these is to think structurally, and communicate structurally. I'm going to summarize the four and then unpack them. The second is they mind read. They are mind readers. I tell this to my students in the first day of class. I say, you're enrolling in this class to learn how to write effectively. An ancillary benefit of this course, you will become better at mind reading. Ooh, I'm going to stick in this course. Beyond thinking structurally and mind reading, the third thing that they do, skilled and effective workplace writers, they make promises and they keep those promises. It's all about making and keeping promises. And the last thing they do is they think visually.
Hmm.
Think visually. So let me walk through these with a little bit more detail one at a time. Can't go through an entire course on all of these, but I'll give a bit more detail. Thinking structurally has two dimensions, macro and micro structure. Macro and micro, I'm borrowing these terms from economics. Macro structure, every document of any length has an opening, middle, closing. Okay, thanks a lot, Professor Snow. It's like, duh, we learned that in second grade. Okay. But the challenge is to know what to do in the opening, which is the most important part. And as we've suggested earlier during this keynote, first, most important thing, make clear your purpose for writing.
Mhm.
And if you have any main points you're trying to convey, surface those points in the opening.
Mhm.
Within the middle, microstructure, make sure it's a logical sequence of topics. A logical sequence. It's too detailed to go into now, but there must be a logical sequence as opposed to random, as opposed to sort of a maze where the audience can't figure out how things fit together.
Mhm.
So, first activity, think and communicate structure. Be aware of structure. We do different things in the opening, we organize ideas in the middle, and then, of course, there's a closing where there's a variety of tactics. We basically put a sense of closure. The single most important thing in the closing is to provide a sense of completeness as opposed to incompleteness, where we might identify, for example, next steps. We might have a very brief recap, not necessarily might. We might do general courtesies. We might provide some sort of so what. Opening, middle, closing, different functions. Audience members have different expectations about what to find. A metaphor is a meal. A good meal, the opening is your appetizers. The middle is your entrees and your sides. The closing would be your desserts. We have different expectations in a meal, similarly in a document.
Mhm.
Beyond thinking and communicating structurally, the second thing is mind reading. What does mind reading have to do with communication? Well, what I call mind reading, somewhat playfully, is what most of my colleagues who teach management communication refer to more conventionally as audience analysis and audience adaptation.
Okay.
That is, in order to choose what to say, you need to know who you're writing to and what they want or need or what their preferences are. Basically, you have to analyze them, or as Snowman says, you have to be a mind reader. And the best writers are able to read the minds, identify the audience and read their minds and make educated guesses about what they're thinking, what questions they have in mind, what they want to know about or about, more detail or less. It's really mind reading. So skilled writers they have to exercise their mind reading ability, and skilled instructors help them get better at it. Beyond thinking structurally and mind reading, the third point I mentioned before is they make promises and keep promises. Okay. Making promises comes in a variety of ways. When we state our purpose up front in our document, that's basically a promise. I'm writing to inform you about the changes in the homework assignment for Thursday. Okay, that's a promise. Tell me what the changes are. I'm writing in order to let you know what the schedule is for our board of directors meetings during spring 2025. That's a promise. Okay, tell me what the schedule is. So we make promises with our statement of purpose. If we design a document using segments in the middle with segment headings, every segment heading makes a promise that it's an explicit or implicit question. Readers will expect to learn the answer in the corresponding passage. Every main point, every topic sentence makes a promise. We state a point, and the promise is, if you want to learn more, keep reading because the rest of this paragraph or segment will give you the evidence, the explanation, etc. So again, skilled writers make promises and they keep promises. They're aware of what promises they're making or what promises the readers perceive them to make so they can satisfy those promises. And the last item then, beyond thinking structurally, mind reading and making promises, is thinking visually. And this taps into your most recent question. When I talk about thinking visually, I'm not thinking about the types of visuals that might be included in a slide deck that is a graphic intensive document with lots of charts and diagrams. My colleague Andrew Quagliata from here at Cornell has a great eCornell course about slide decks to help people learn how to design very effective slide decks. And he and I are working on a book on that topic. That's not what I'm talking about here. Thinking visually in email, memo reports, and other Word documents means managing the document design features, the visual display. Don't underestimate how important visual display is. And managing the visual display has three key dimensions. The first of these for any document, make sure that it is conventional in dress. That is, it should be dressed like other documents of the same genre. A resume should look like a resume and not like an essay, for example. A slide deck should look like other slide decks. So one is conventional in deck, a memo report address. Memo report should look like other memo reports. Beyond conventional in dress, the second one is we should make sure that each document is visually inviting. Visually inviting. And I'll quote here, former student of mine, Dan Leva, who until about a year ago was the chief tasting officer for the Wings Over company, Wings Over Ithaca, et cetera. And Dan described what he does as the CEO, or what he used to do as the CEO, when he was managing the managers of individual shops, Wings Over Ithaca, et cetera. He told some colleagues and me that one of the challenges that he faced as an executive, Cornell educated from the hotel school, was that he learned how to write really well, but the folks who are managing the individual shops are sometimes having to write important documents, but they're not Cornell educated. And many of them had never taken a good management writing course, but they had important information to share with suppliers or legal representatives or tax representatives or others. I asked Daniel, what do you do? And Daniel said, I asked them to write a first draft. He said, and then I take it, and I'll quote him. He said, and then I make it pretty. His words, which is wonderful. But what it says in part is make it visually inviting so readers are eager to read rather than reluctant to read. And the last part of thinking visually, which is conventional address, visually inviting, high in skim value. Concept of skim value, making it easy for the readers to navigate the document, no matter how long it may be. The term skim value was coined by a former colleague of mine, a woman by the name of Mary Munter, now retired. For many decades, she taught at Stanford Business School, and she taught at Tuck, the business school at Dartmouth. And as part of her first book on business writing, a wonderful book called Guide to Management Communication, Prentice Hall book, you can find copies for sale used online. Get a copy, get an early edition, anywhere from the first through fifth or sixth edition before it got too unwieldy. But Mary coined the term skim value. That is, readers want to be able to find the most information quickly. They want to be able to navigate. And the tools that we use to make documents visually inviting and high in skim value, the main tools, the three main tools, we manage our paragraph size, not too long. We manage via segment headings and subheadings, and we manage via bulleted lists where appropriate. For paragraph size, general guideline, rarely, if ever, longer than 8 lines. You're writing a document, you got a paragraph longer than 8 lines, you should consider revising it because it becomes undaunting visually. And any paragraph longer than 8 lines, I'll go out on a limb and say, there's some internal structure waiting for you to discover and reveal, either by cutting it apart into separate paragraphs or building in a bulleted list, if appropriate, or by using headings or subheadings. So paragraphs manage and open paragraphs with the main point up front as a courtesy to your readers. Beyond paragraphs, bulleted lists. Some paragraphs function better as bulleted lists, but there's a condition that must apply. We don't want to get list happy. We don't want to get crazy with lists. A paragraph may work better as a list, bulleted list, only if this condition applies. There's got to be 2 or more of the same kind of idea that we're discussing. That is, for a list to be logical, it's got to be at least 2 items. No such thing as a single item list. You go to list prison if you have a single item list. Sorry, it doesn't work. 2 or more of what we call functionally equivalent ideas, sometimes called conceptually parallel. If you have 2 or more of the same sort of thing, paragraph format, it all wraps. It's hard to see where each idea begins and ends. But if you have 2 or more reasons, challenges, features, consequences, mitigating factors, whatever they are, and you present them in list form, it's that much easier for the audience to see at a glance how many items there are, because they see the bullets, where each item begins and ends, because Microsoft's or even Outlook's bullet button makes it so easy. So they can see where each one begins and ends, and again, how many there are. So what a great service for the readers to enhance visual attractiveness and skim value. And beyond list, the last item then is segment headings, especially for the middle. And I'm going to quote here my former colleague, Daphne Jameson. We use segment headings, main headings or subheadings, Daphne Jameson is a former professor from the hotel school, Cornell, now retired. And Daphne Jameson once said really wonderfully, she said, segment headings are the way that we make the structure visible. We help readers to navigate so they can find just the section they want. They find the heading, they read the corresponding passage. Where they see a heading, they don't really care about that topic. They know they can skip it or skim it and find the section they want. Or if they're reviewing a document days or weeks or years or months later, they can find just that section because the segment headings help build in high skim value.
And with that, I know I promised the audience that I would touch on the Pat Benatar record in the back. I know its meaning, but for our audience who's joining us for the first time, they probably do not. So I'm wondering if you could go a little bit into the Pat Benatar record over your shoulder.
Happy to do so. Thank you for raising the question. So here I am in my home office, and there are two visual sort of echoes here behind me.
Mhm.
Because my name is Professor Snow, I have a nickname, and that is Snowman. And my students came up with that a number of years ago, and I like it. But ask my students not to take the liberty of referring to me as the Snowman until they pass the course. It's sort of a badge of honor that they earn. And once they've done so, great. Most of my former students, friends, colleagues refer to me as Snowman. It's one way to break down barriers, but not while they're in the course. They have to earn that. The second item behind me in my home office here is Pat Benatar. Not because I am a fan of Pat Benatar. Pat Benatar is wonderful. She was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 2 years ago. The second video ever shown on MTV, 1981, when MTV started, back when they used to show music videos, was a Pat Benatar video. But the reason I share this behind me, it's a visual echo of a really important point that has been implicit, if not explicit, in what we've said all along. It has to do with Pat Benatar's perhaps most famous song.
Mhm.
I'm going to contrast here Pat Benatar with Vanessa Williams. Now, many people, at least those of my generation, and I'm very distant from my current students, my cultural reference points are different than theirs. Vanessa Williams, many people know not only as a former Miss America from Syracuse University, but more importantly as a television star on Ugly Betty, Desperate Housewives, or a star on Broadway, Into the Woods, or having been a former wife of Rick Fox, the basketball player, but they know her best as a singer. And in 1992, she released a Grammy-nominated single called Save the Best for Last. Perhaps her most famous song, Save the Best for Last. So we have the Vanessa Williams approach, Save the Best for Last, as applied to documents.
Mhm.
And so based on what I've said, am I saying that we pay homage to Vanessa Williams, Save the Best for Last? That seems to be the opposite of what we've been talking about for this entire hour. That's correct. It's the opposite. We do not pay homage to Vanessa Williams. She's a wonderful talent, but we don't pay homage for her when it comes to workplace writing. We do instead pay homage to Pat Benatar, because arguably her most famous song is called not Save the Best for Last, but instead Hit Me with Your Best Shot. And again, anyone can go online and pull it up. You will recognize it. Hit Me with Your Best Shot, when I started using this, when she was still on the charts, all my students recognize, and it's a great visual, a great conceptual, in this case, visual echo of this important concept as it applies to workplace writing. What does it mean as it applies to workplace writing? Hit me with your best shot. Most important information up front. Surface your purpose, and once you've done so, surface your points. Purposes and points up front, and then unpack afterwards. So I use this here as a visual echo anytime in my home office with whom I'm speaking to remind them, hit them with your best shot, hit them with your best shot. And of course, it also has applications for the effort that we devote as we conduct ourselves as people. Hopefully, we're all bringing our best shot to all of our endeavors, even beyond our workplace communication.
And I just got a really interesting question in from one of our audience members. So, a lot of the concepts we're talking about is, business writing in general. Does this work across, multiple different industries? So, how you would write as a lawyer versus as a product manager at Amazon, like you mentioned, or, as a doctor or something. Do these concepts translate across different fields?
So the short answer is yes. There are likely to be some tweaks.
Mhm.
So, for example, lawyers, if they're writing contracts or leases, there are a lot of things that they're going to do in those documents that are not going to be the same as what they would do in a managerial document. So, when we talk about managerial writing in particular, which is writing to influence decision making,
Mhm.
the type of legal writing that most of us see as lay people may well be contracts,
Okay.
stuff that we tend to sort of gloss over if we need a signature because it looks so dense, really dense and big paragraphs,
Mhm.
sort of visually uninviting. But even within the field of law, when attorneys are writing a brief for a judge to influence some decision involving a case, a
Mhm.
brief is a managerial document. And any judge, no judge wants to read what looks like a contract, visually dense. They don't want to have to work that hard.
Mhm.
So the principles that we're talking about here with regard to structure, audience adaptation, et cetera, these will apply in that type of situation for legal writers. Make clear your purpose, surface your points, build in high skim value, make it visually inviting as appropriate,
Mhm.
make it logically structured. So these things will apply in legal contexts. Again, there are slight differences, for example, in the world of real estate or finance. If folks are writing visually intensive documents like slide decks,
Mhm.
but even for slide decks, which tend to be visually intensive, where each main page is one main set of ideas at a time, the best slide decks, which are displayed using PowerPoint typically, not in portrait mode, but in landscape mode, the best slide deck pages, and I've learned this from my colleague Andrew Quagliata, will have a main point atop the page, the highest level point. There might be a sub point, what we call a sub headline, and then the body of the page is whatever evidence, graphs, for example, textual elaboration, data, commentary, so that they can understand and accept the main point on that page. So it's similar ideas applied somewhat differently in different workplace contexts.
Mhm.
But overall, pretty much the same.
That's good to know. And I knew this question would pop up, so I want to make sure I get to it. Vishal Singh actually asked, obviously with ChatGPT and AI obviously becoming the norm, it seems like. Vishal asked, Professor Snow, what are your thoughts about emails? And I would further broaden that to just any workplace writing in general, written by ChatGPT. I can spot an email written by AI, and I lose interest in that email because it appears impersonal.
Great. Well, I'm delighted to hear from Vishal. Good to see you. Good to hear from you. I think we last saw each other a year ago, and I think you were my student roughly 20 years ago, if I recall correctly, at the hotel school. So AI brings us opportunities and challenges,
Okay.
and and we're all trying to figure it out because it's still relatively new. The opportunity. Well, we'll start with the challenges. The challenges for AI as writers involves resist. Perhaps the single most important challenge is to resist the temptation to let AI do our thinking for us. Don't outsource your thinking. When you create a document in the workplace and you send it to your readers, whether you're applying for a job and it's a search committee, or you're a consultant and it's a client, whoever you write to, or an email, people who read it, what they want to know, what they expect to know is, what do you have to tell me? Or put differently, what do you think and why?
Mhm.
And students have to resist the temptation because when they're students, there's a strong temptation. Well, let AI do it. ChatGPT is a pretty good tool. I'd much rather be doing a lot of other things than write or taking the time to write. So let me have AI do it. The risks of AI, number one, you're outsourcing your thinking. And although AI can do some things well, we know that it sometimes gets things wrong. It sometimes makes things up. And even if neither of those apply, an AI document tends to look like lots of other AI documents. And so if folks are applying for a job and they're not really sure how to write an application letter, they may say, AI, here's a job spec I'm applying for, write an application letter for me. The risk is if two or more individuals use AI, or a lot more, the application letters that come into the recruiting committee start to look alike. And you can be confident, no matter how well written they are, when they all look alike, that's an indicator to the recruiting committee that this person has not written the document by himself or herself.
Mhm.
That will not serve you well. If you're a consultant using AI to write for you and your client discovers that you have submitted an AI written report, you're not going to have a happy client. They're not going to pay your fee. Or if they pay your fee, they're never going to hire you again. So the challenge is not that we never use AI, but that we figure out constructive ways in which to do so. And I would suggest that means not using it for generating content and structure, not a first draft. Start with your own thinking, trust your own thinking, assuming, of course, that you've taken a good course to help you push your thinking and be a disciplined thinker about workplace writing. trust your own thinking, but you could use AI. And here, I'll give you just a few contexts.
Okay.
For many years, we have used spell check or its equivalent. No one would object to spell check. It's kind of built into Word nowadays, although it used to be a separate function 30 years ago. Well, if you have a draft that you've created of a document and you would like to have AI review it as an editor, even for my students, I have no objection. Whether English is your first language, or perhaps more specifically, if English is not your first language and you are not perfect in grammar or mechanics or punctuation, I would have no objection if AI can help clean it up. Don't rely upon it exclusively because it may get things wrong, but it may be able to clean up prose style. Nowadays, folks aren't using spell check, but they're frequently using Grammarly in the workplace and certainly in school. Grammarly, the folks who designed Grammarly, they have a program that can help clean up your writing. I wouldn't object to that. So again, AI may be good in that context. For tone, I was at a workshop last night. I was delivering on application letters, and some international students asked me about tone because they're concerned about that. My response would be, tone is hard. It's especially hard for those for whom English is not a first language. Write your draft, and if you're concerned about the tone, subject it to AI or ChatGPT and ask it to describe your tone, or ask it, can you modify the tone? Can you make it more friendly? Or can you make it more deferential? And AI is very talented. I once gave it something, a document I'd written, and I said, make it sound like Bob Dylan. And it did. And it was great. It sounded like a Bob Dylan song. So AI is pretty good. But even if it makes changes, don't accept them at face value. You still need to review any sentence level changes it is suggesting. And I'll offer one more example here about how it could be helpful. And this is certainly not exhaustive. But one opportunity might be if you're writing a draft of something and you would like to get feedback on the draft, ChatGPT or its equivalent might be a good place to get feedback. I'll give you a very specific example. I do occasional consulting, and every so often a prospective client, usually a new client, will ask me to write a proposal for a consulting engagement. And the proposals are really important documents. They're high stakes. They will often drive the decision. I'm a pretty good writer, know how to write an effective proposal. When I have an incredibly high stakes document, I will frequently send it to one of 2 or 3 colleagues. Like I sent one just this morning to 3 colleagues. And I will say, do me a favor, take a look at this and share with me any feedback that you have. Now, when I do this, the 2 or 3 colleagues I send this to are folks whom I like, respect, and admire. And I know that they are good writers. So I get feedback from them, and they give me feedback, and sometimes they see things that I am blind to, or sometimes they'll offer a suggestion that I reject. But I have folks I like, respect, and admire give me things that perhaps I cannot see. It seems to me to be reasonable if you write a document, high stakes, and you want to have ChatGPT, take a look at the structure. Might there be an alternate way of structuring this document? Or you're trying to conduct an argument, legal or otherwise. Here are the main reasons I'm conveying here. Are there other reasons that you would think about? Or if they're writing an application letter, last example. Here's the job specs. Here's my draft. Are there other points I should be raising? So there could be very constructive uses of AI that are different than outsourcing your thinking and allowing it to do the thinking for you. My inclination is don't let it be the first draft. First draft starts here, disciplined thinking. But if you wanted as a reviewer or as an editor to give you some guidance that you still have to make decisions about, it could be constructive. And my guess is folks in the workplace are probably finding even more useful applications. So Vishal, thank you for the question.
Thank you for that, Vishal. Well, Craig, I could talk to you literally all day about this subject. But I wanted to kind of wrap up with, one final question, which is, we saw from folks' response, clarity is really kind of the big thing for them. So what's kind of that one small change they can make as far as, kind of writing their next email or writing their next report or something that they can do to sound more clarifying.
So I guess I'm going to think out loud here, because ultimately it's everything we've been talking about.
Mhm.
It's surfacing your points, it's delivering value, it's having a logical structure, it's managing the document design features. So I guess thinking out loud, it starts with understanding what we talked about earlier. Workplace writing is different than other modes of writing. Different set of norms, different set of guidelines, different set of reasons why readers read, and a different set of ways that they read. They don't always read first to last. They will scan, they will skim, they will sometimes read in full, they will sometimes review selectively or in full. And so once we understand and accept that, we accept the responsibility of designing documents in such a way so that, as we go back to what I said earlier, readers can find the most important information quickly and easily. And I've been saying this for years. We accept the responsibility of working harder, doing more, sometimes taking more time to craft an important document, so our readers will do less, so that they can spend less time and process more quickly. And I can recall years ago teaching freshmen at the hotel school where some of them resented that. Like, why should I work hard? Let them work hard. Well, if we have that attitude, the risk is, with all due respect, they may not do it. The risk of not doing all the things that are available within reason. How long should it take? As long as it takes, but no longer, but no briefer. But the risk of not surfacing your purpose, surfacing your main points, building in a logical structure, supporting and illustrating the points, mind reading by anticipating the questions likely to emerge in the reader's mind and addressing them, managing the visual display. The consequence of not doing these things is the readers may not read. They don't have to read. There's no one twisting their arm. They may not read. They may just hit delete or simply stop reading at some point. Or they may read and guess and get wrong the purpose or the points or the ask. Or they may read and get it right, but are so annoyed that your esteem in their eyes declines. So really, it's a combination of all these things. I hope that in the course of this hour, via your questions and my responses, we've given enough guidance that are both broad, but also specific enough to help people make choices with regard to the documents that they produce.
Well, I for sure will definitely remember that. Work a little harder so your reader doesn't have to. I'm going to keep
Can I
that.
add one more thing?
Yes.
There's one more thing. And the one more thing is the first rule of workplace writing.
Yes.
And the first rule of workplace writing, I sometimes ask this of my students, my clients, what's the first rule? Where do we start? And students and clients come up with good ideas. Purpose is job one. Adapt to your audience. Make it pretty, et cetera, et cetera. Keep it concise. All good. They're all legitimate, but I wouldn't say that's the first rule. The first rule of workplace writing, don't write unless you need to write. And what I mean by that more specifically is whatever you're trying to accomplish with regard to your audience, if you can accomplish that via some other channel, usually some oral channel, via a telephone call, which is synchronous, people can raise questions, etc., via an interpersonal conversation, walk down the hall, knock on the door, have a coffee, conversation on coffee, a presentation, a meeting, things that are synchronous, for example, or so many other channels where you don't have to take the time and devote the effort to write, and you have the opportunity, people can read into your tone, your facial expressiveness, your gestures. They can interrupt with questions, asking for elaboration. They could say, understood, move on. If you don't need to write, don't write. But there are many, many good reasons to write. I'm not saying don't write. Write only if there's a good reason to write. And most of the reasons for writing have to do with time and space, overcoming the challenges of communicating with someone at a time. Where I write something 5:30 in the morning and I send it to you, you don't need to be awake at 5:30. You probably get up at a more reasonable time. You can read it at 8:30 or whatever when you get into the office. Or space. I can write something and send it off to a client in Japan. He's in Tokyo. I'm here in Ithaca. Well, we have bridged that challenge of space. So there are many, many good reasons for writing, including one more, having a document. We have a record of what someone has communicated, which we don't necessarily have during interpersonal conversation or telephone, et cetera. There are many good reasons for writing, and writing ain't going out of style anytime soon. But if you can accomplish your goals and meet your audience needs via some other channel that requires less time or investment or risk of miscommunication, then certainly use that other channel. Skilled communicators choose the appropriate channels for the appropriate situations. And when the channel involves writing, everything we've chatted about for the preceding 60 minutes should help.
Awesome. Well, Craig, it was always a pleasure having you. Like I said, I could listen to you for literally hours. Audience, thank you so much for sticking with us. We really appreciate it. One last thing, we just want to know kind of how we did. We have a rating scale. You shoot with your QR code. So we appreciate any feedback you can give us on, ways we can improve, anything like that. But again, Craig, thank you so much for staying with us.
My treat for you and the participants.
Awesome. Thank you. Audience, similar. Thank you for staying with us, and we'll see you at the next keynote. Have a great afternoon.